All right, so we have a lot of topics on the whiteboard, and I even had a theme for this week. On Monday, I had a theme. I was going to talk about this whole part of the economy, which I think is kind of problematic, and that we need to move past. That's just kind of ingrained in us as Americans. And then Tuesday happened, and we got some terrible news out of Atlanta. And I'm pretty sure everyone watching this knows what happened in Atlanta. There was a mass shooting of 8 people in spas and salons, including 6 Asian women. And it was really awful. And then the sheriff saying that he just had a bad day. Look, when I have a bad day, I have a tall glass of wine, I put on my fuzzy slippers, and I play Xbox for hours. You don't kill people if you have a bad day. It's just... So anyway, that level of defending a murderer, a mass murderer, is just heartbreaking. But I wanted to use the anger from this moment, the frustration from this moment, to talk about the long history of Asian American racism. So just to start, I'm going to use the term Asian American, and I'm going to describe a lot of things about the racism and things like that. This is not to be disinclusive of Pacific Islanders, of Pacific Islanders who were born and raised in the United States, Asians from the subcontinent, Indians, Pakistanis, who also experienced racism. This isn't to be exclusive of any of those, or people who are born in Asia and come here and aren't born here wouldn't categorize themselves as Asian Americans. I'm going to use the word Asian American, Asian interchangeably, but please know that I really do sincerely mean kind of that whole group there, and I'm not meaning to exclude anyone. So let's start. What is Asia? Okay, Asia is a continent. It's pretty huge. The area that we call Asia spans from the Urals in Russia down to the Red Sea in Egypt, all the way, which includes Turkey and the Middle East, by the way, all the way over to Indonesia and Siberia. It's an absolute giant area. There are dozens of countries there, each of which have their own unique cultures. Their people are not the same. They're not one type. They don't all look the same. They don't speak the same language. So first we have to understand kind of the great diversity that comes with the word Asian, someone from Asia. And by the way, not all people who live in Asia would identify as Asian. I think if you talked to a Turk or an Israeli or a Saudi, they wouldn't identify as Asian. My guess is they probably wouldn't. I don't know if people residing in the subcontinent, India, Nepal, and Pakistan would identify as Asian either. But in the modern kind of colloquial sense, we think of Asian as Southeast Asian, China, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and the nations around there. Apologies if I missed any. And there's been a long, storied, and problematic history about the treatment of those people in the United States. So I want to go all the way back to the gold rush. So, by the way, there were people of Asian descent, people coming from the continent of Asia in the United States before then. Their migration to what is now the United States wasn't new in the 1800s when we started talking, when we had the gold rush. But I want to go there because that's kind of the start of the real systemic bigotry against them. And I want to talk it through. So when they were coming over here, they were not allowed to pan for gold. So when there was the big gold rush in California and along the West Coast, for the most part, we did not allow Asians to pan for gold. So in order to make money, they set up other industries. And the industry that became most famous for were the laundries, were the laundromats. And this obviously was essentially a support organization for the many miners and people who traveled across the country to pan gold because they weren't allowed to pan gold. And, you know, they were forced into, I don't want to say they were forced into that particular profession, but they were forced out of kind of these other professions. So immediately you have this weird dichotomy going on where, we want to reward them as being entrepreneurs. We start to see the model minority stereotype floating around. But at the same time, we were actively using racism to stop them from getting more lucrative jobs panning gold, where lots of people were able to make their fortunes and get rich. And by the way, the model minority stereotype, I want to talk about a little bit. Obviously, I'll do that over the course of the whole this whole topic. But model minority is essentially a way to pit black folk and Asian folk against each other in the name of white supremacy. And there's nothing else to it, right? I mean, that's really how it's been used. So when I hear people say, crimes against Asians can't be white supremacy because black people commit them too, that's a lie. It simply isn't true. The pitting of black folk against Asian folk using the model minority stereotype is pervasive throughout American history and started a long time ago. So we're moving on from the time of the gold rush up until there were lots of people coming, primarily from China, and the United States was much more an explicitly racist country in government than it is today, at the federal level anyway. And we have the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? Essentially establishing quotas. Hey, only so many different types of people come here. And by the way, this was not the first of the exclusion acts. There were exclusion acts against other people as well. To understand the context that the people from China, people from the continent of Asia were not the first people to kind of be subject to these racist laws. But there was one there. We move up through history, and more people are coming from Asia, and a lot of times we are seeing, people come from Asia whose families are wealthy, who are able to enroll their children in, who have brilliant children that they're able to enroll in great higher academic institutions, higher education academic institutions, and we start to see stereotypes about Asians in math. And again, the model minority stereotype comes up because the thought is then like, hey, this is pitched at blacks to turn Asians and blacks against each other. But essentially, the model minority stereotype is thrown in the face of black people again to say, hey, they can make it. They came here with nothing. Not true. They came here, and they're starting their life over. Not always true. Why can't you? Right? And it was always a ploy to get black people to hate Asian people and to get Asian people to hate and fear black people. And by the way, all the while, not to be concerned about white people who are really doing the legislating and the killing and the hate primarily, and who were creating these narratives. You move up through the 20th century, there were all sorts of problems. Obviously, there are these these problematic tropes about Asian sexuality, having to do with submissive women, having to do with women in massage parlors, Asian women being prostitutes. And again, this is just a trope. It's a type. It's not real. And again, with all the things that I'm going to be discussing here, none of it is real. Yes, it's true that some families were able to enroll their Asian children in great academic institutions in the United States, but a lot of times it was because who we saw coming from the Asian continent, we were seeing their best, right? They were able to send the brightest, wealthiest families here, and those are the ones, by the way, who are being put up on that pedestal, again, specifically to hurt Asian-Black relations and to support white supremacy. Taking that racism that was already ingrained in us, many people will, well, I don't want to say will remember, but remember learning in school that on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese. Now, there are tons of reasons why that happened. I don't really want to get into them here. It doesn't really have to do with race relations at all. But so what was America's reaction to Asian people or Japanese people or the Japanese nation even just bombing the United States? Well, we built internment camps. We rounded up Japanese Americans, Asian Americans who didn't do anything wrong, who showed, literally just for speaking Japanese, for knowing Japanese people, and we locked them up for years, all throughout World War II, which is just an absolute stain on our country's history. But but we couldn't have done that without the pervasive racism of the laundromats, of the Asian submissives, of the model men, all the racism that we had built before, the Chinese Exclusion Act, everything. It all led up to that, right? So we took that racism we already had and we responded to a crisis in the worst way possible. And we locked all these people up. By the way, we did not, as a nation, learn this lesson at all. Learn our lesson from that experience at all. And after the war, people got reparations. Who were like, oh shit, this is, we probably shouldn't have interred all these people for literally no goddamn reason at all. But we paid out, but we didn't learn anything from that experience. And Asian American racism continued to be pervasive. We had films in the later part of the 20th century. I believe Full Metal Jacket is the one that most people are talking about now, with the comment, "Me love you long time," I think was the line. Obviously, a racist trope about broken English, a racist trope about submissive Asian women, and things like that. And of course, there has always been some level of xenophobia, and it's just building and building. And then, of course, in 2019, when we had the coronavirus, the beginning of the coronavirus, we heard from the President of the United States and many of his allies that this was the China virus, that this was Kung flu, that China did this to us intentionally. There were conspiracy theories that this was crafted in a laboratory in China in order to infect Americans. Which, by the way, the rationale of that is completely ludicrous. I mean, hundreds and thousands of Chinese people died. Lots of other Asians died. The virus has spread throughout the entire world. Millions of people have died. Many more millions have gotten it and will have long-term issues. I don't even want to. Anyway, and then for a year and change, we have this constant rhetoric: China virus, Kung flu, China, right? All these ridiculous things, and they're all wrong. Every single one of them is wrong, and I obviously totally disavow them. And then we saw a rise in attacks on Asian Americans or people who looked Asian. And at this point, we had the people who are committing these attacks they weren't even just attacking Chinese people. Not that would make it any better, right? But they're attacking all people from Asian descent, which shows you that this long history of racism has just been building and building and building. And this is where we are again, where Asians and Asian Americans and are being attacked in the street. Terrible and awful footage of people being pushed into the street and beaten in broad daylight. And this is just, we haven't really learned a way in the United States to fix this. And then, of course, we have someone who's claiming he has a sex addiction. So after all of this, right, and all the hatred towards Asians, we have just last Tuesday someone claiming that their murder of 6 Asian women and 2 others was because of their sex addiction. Because sexism has nothing to do with racism in America, and especially when it comes to Asian women. I mean, it just does. I hope I've laid out the history for you enough, but we have, in this country, fomented for hundreds of years a racial hatred of Asian people and a sexually frustrated racial hatred of Asian women And that needs to play into every discussion that we have about this. I saw discussions by Asian women who were saying that they had never experienced racism without sexism, which isn't surprising at all, really. It's unfortunate and it's awful and it ought to be condemned. But we can't just think about this shooter and the victims. May they all rest in peace and may their memories be for a blessing. Without the context of racial violence, sexual violence, and where they intersect, and who the victims of that are. And those 6 Asian women who were brutally, violently, terribly murdered, had their lives stolen from them by this man who is just a few years younger than I am, 21 years old. It's harrowing. And I think as a nation, we really need to take the time to reflect about taking care of all of our citizens. And not just citizens, but taking care of everyone who lives here. Because that type of violence by someone so young is truly, truly terrible. And we need to fight it, and we need to fight the language that makes it possible at every turn. This shouldn't be happening, although it is happening, and we all know why. And I want to send my heart and soul out to everyone who is grieving, everyone who feels scared, at whether they are Asian presenting or white presenting, or from a different part of Asia, and they've felt discrimination. I'm so sorry that this is happening, and we have to do better. We can't continue to treat the Asians who live in our country like this. There are brothers, there are sisters, there are non-binary siblings. And whether you know someone who has been targeted, or you know someone who knows someone who's been targeted, or even if you don't know any Asian people at all, take this moment to think about how the history of America has created such a violent and dangerous place for them here, and what we can do to fix that.